Lyra Stonehaven had understood, since she was old enough to pay attention to adult rooms, that there was a considerable difference between being chosen and being selected. Being chosen meant someone looked at you, specifically you, with all your particular qualities and imperfections, and decided that you were the person they wanted beside them. Being selected meant someone looked at what you represented and decided that it solved something. The distinction mattered. It mattered enormously. And Lyra, who had been paying attention to adult rooms since she was approximately 9 years old and had become very good at it, had understood this distinction long before she became the thing that solved something for someone else. She was the daughter of Elder Corin Stonehaven, whose southern bloodline had held the Asheville territories through 2 wars and 4 droughts and 7 treaty negotiations, not one of which had concluded the way he hoped, and all of which he had walked away from with his people alive. He was, in the particular way of men who have survived decades of difficult circumstances, someone who had learned to make peace with imperfect outcomes. His daughter had inherited this from him entirely. What she had not inherited was the assumption that her own life was exempt from those imperfect outcomes. She had grown up understanding that the Stonehaven name carried weight, and that weight could be leveraged, and that being the daughter of a leverageable name meant that sooner or later someone would want to use it for something. This was not bitterness. It was simply information. Lyra had always preferred information to illusion, illusions made for worse decisions. So when her father called her into his study on the last evening of the autumn moon and told her, with the kind of careful, preliminary silence that men use when they have been building towards something for 3 days and still have not found the right approach, that Alpha Khan Dravenmore of the Northern Reach had submitted a formal bonding request with her name on it, Lyra did not ask if she could say no. She asked what happened to the eastern villages if she did. Her father's face did something complicated. He was a brave man in the external sense, the kind who had ridden into territorial conflicts with insufficient resources because he believed in something worth bleeding for. But he was also a father, and fatherhood had given him a specific kind of vulnerability that warfare never quite had. He looked at his daughter across the study desk and appeared briefly to be having a conversation with himself about what kind of man he was. 300 families, he said, when the internal conversation had concluded. Possibly more by the second dry month. Without access to the northern trade routes, the eastern settlements don't survive the winter. Lyra was sitting in the old leather chair across from him, the one she had sat in since she was small enough for her feet not to reach the floor. She pressed her palms against her knees. "Tell me about him," she said. Her father paused, capable, self-contained. "I have met him twice across territorial negotiations. He is not a man who shows you what he is thinking." "That is not the same as not cruel." "No," her father admitted. "It isn't, but I have found no evidence of cruelty." Lyra nodded once, in the way she nodded when a decision she had already been making in the back of her mind finished making itself. "Then I'll go," she said. "Lyra." "Don't apologize," she told him, not unkindly, with the specific firmness of a woman who understands that apologies add weight to things without lightening them. "Just tell me the terms." The terms were these. The Stonehaven territories kept their eastern settlements and their trade access and their displaced families. In exchange, Lyra would bond with the Alpha of the Northern Reach and become his mate, a living joining of 2 bloodlines, a guarantee written in something more permanent than ink. She packed 2 bags. She said goodbye to her mother's grave on the hill above the eastern village, pressing her palm against the stone in the way she had done since she was 9 years old, and the world had first shown her what it meant to lose something permanent. She traveled north for 4 days and told herself, on each of those 4 days, that she had chosen this. That made it different from being sent. She was going to keep believing that distinction was real for as long as it remained useful. Dravenmore Packhouse stood at the northern edge of the pine forest like a thing that had decided to become permanent out of sheer stubbornness. Dark stone and iron and old timber, wide and tall, and built in the specific architectural language of structures designed to communicate one thing and one thing only. that the people inside them were not going anywhere. The pine forest pressed in on three sides and gave the compound the deep, living smell of something older than its walls. Lyra stepped out of the travel carriage, looked up at the face of it and thought, with the complete clarity of a woman who has no energy left for pretending, "Right, then I begin." The bonding ceremony was brief and exact. The entire pack council attended, along with senior household wolves, and a court that assessed her arrival with the careful, lateral attention of people trying to determine where to file a new development. Con Dravenmore stood at the altar stone in formal black. He was taller than she had expected and stiller than most people who were that tall, with the kind of contained, deliberate quiet about him that reminded her of old-growth timber. Not because there was anything wooden in him, but because there was something that suggested a great deal of weight being held at rest. When the ceremony reached the moment that required him to look at her, he did. His eyes were dark and told her nothing. She held them without looking away and thought, steady and unreadable. I know what to do with steady and unreadable. I have navigated worse. He placed the bonding ring on her finger without looking down at it. Dark iron set with northern amber, warm gold, deep and old. It fit exactly right. She was told later that the pack jeweler had been sent her measurements in advance. That small, careful, impersonal care was the first detail about Con Dravenmore that she tucked away and kept. She walked out of the hall as something she had not been when she walked in. She did not look back at her father when she passed through the great door, because looking back was a thing she could not afford yet, and Lyra Stonehaven had always been very disciplined about what she could and could not afford. The first truth Dravenmore Pack House taught her was this: large and busy places have a specific way of being lonely that empty places do not. In an empty place, the loneliness is obvious. It is present and honest, and you can address it directly. In a large, busy place full of people with roles and routines and established relationships, the loneliness hides in the gaps between all of that activity. It hides in the way conversations pause slightly when you enter a room, in the way people find their eyes pointing slightly past you rather than at you, in the way your name is said correctly and without warmth, and you cannot complain about it because nothing technically wrong has been done. Lyra had understood by the end of the first week that she was not disliked. She was not unwelcome in the formal sense. She was simply not yet real to these people. She was a category, the Southern Bond, the Treaty Luna. She existed in their awareness the way a new piece of furniture exists in a room it has been placed in, acknowledged, assigned its function, not examined closely. She had decided, the morning she understood this, that she would make herself real, not through announcement or performance, but through the slower, more reliable method of paying attention to people, until they understood that she was someone who paid attention. People remember being paid attention to. It is rarer than it should be. Con Dravenmore was not unkind to her. She repeated this to herself regularly, not as comfort exactly, but as information she needed to maintain accurate. He was polite. He was correct. He checked on her comfort with the reliable regularity of someone who had been told this was among his responsibilities and took his responsibilities seriously regardless of whether his personal investment was there. At formal gatherings, he introduced her to wolves she had not met. At council sessions, he ensured she was not excluded from discussions relevant to her position. He never once addressed her with anything but appropriate respect. He also did not come to her room. There was a connecting door between their chambers, behind a heavy curtain she had noticed on the third evening. She had checked it on the fourth. Quietly, in the manner of someone who needs to know where all the exits are before they can sleep properly. It was unlocked, both sides. She stood at it for a moment and considered what that meant, and then let the curtain fall and went to bed and did not let herself think about it further. The second truth was that Khan ran his pack the way a properly maintained clock runs, exactly, reliably, with the total, trustworthy consistency of something built to measure rather than to feel. He was never unprepared, never late, never visibly uncertain in the council chamber or the great hall. In 4 months of watching him in those spaces, Lyra never once saw the outside world catch him off guard. She found this admirable. She also found it, in a way she had not organized into words yet, deeply lonely to observe. A man that contained had learned the containment from somewhere. Things were learned for reasons. She filed that away. The third truth, and the one that shaped all the others, was that the most powerful force inside Dravenmore Packhouse was not the Alpha. It was Vera Dravenmore. Silver-haired, precise, with pale eyes that completed their assessment of a room. By the time most people were still registering, they had entered one. She had been beautiful once in the conventional sense, and the years had turned that beauty into something more formidable and less interested in being admired. She had raised Khan alone from the age of 12, when a territorial war had made her a widow, and the pack had needed leadership before grief had finished its work. She had held 3,000 wolves together through that transition without a single day of visible hesitation, and she wore all of that history the way certain people wear old scars, not as wounds, but as facts about themselves they have made peace with. She welcomed Lyra to the pack house with perfect courtesy. Lyra heard the courtesy clearly. Beneath it, she also heard something that courtesy was covering, not hostility exactly, something older and more fundamental than hostility. The specific, unspoken communication of a woman who had spent 22 years being the most important person in one particular man's life, and had not been consulted about whether she wanted to share that position. Lyra understood this. She did not yet decide how she felt about it. That kind of deciding required more information than she had. She spent the first month learning. She mapped every corridor in the pack house without appearing to. She memorized names and roles, and the specific ways people addressed each other in private versus formal settings, which told you more about the actual power structure of a place than any official hierarchy did. She discovered, through the particular way sound traveled in the stone council chamber, that the east corner near the window carried voices from the hallway outside, in ways that people who had grown up with the building had long since stopped accounting for. She attended every function. She smiled with the precise calibration of a woman who understood the specific value of warmth that did not cross into desperation. She sat in the shared wing each night alone and told herself, "This is survivable. I have survived harder things than a cold and correct life." She was, on the whole, not wrong about this. She was also, in the particular way of people who are technically correct but missing something essential, not entirely right. She had not planned on the fire room. That was the detail she came back to later, when she was trying to understand how she had let her guard down so completely and with so little resistance. She had arrived at Dravenmore Pack House with walls she had built specifically for this situation, designed in advance, tested, maintained with genuine discipline. She had not constructed those walls for nothing. She had constructed them because she had understood, before she ever set foot in this pack house, that the most dangerous thing she could do was want something here that this place had not agreed to give her. She had been doing well. Then came the Wednesday evening in the 7th week. She was in the East Reading Room, a small, quiet space off the main library corridor that she had claimed by the simple process of using it consistently, until it became hers by habit rather than assignment. She was reading a history of the southern border negotiations from 3 generations back, reviewing it not for pleasure, though she found herself genuinely engaged, but because she was trying to understand the legal architecture underneath the current Eastern trade agreements and identify where the structural gaps were that nobody in the council seemed interested in examining. She heard footsteps in the corridor. She looked up. Con Dravenmore was standing in the doorway. Not in his formal alpha coat, in a plain dark shirt with his sleeves pushed to the elbows, with the specific, unguarded look of a man who had finished something difficult and had arrived in a doorway slightly ahead of his own intention. He looked at the book in her hands. He looked at the small fire in the reading room hearth. Then he looked at her. And she saw, for the first time in 7 weeks, something on his face that was not the managed, calculated surface he wore in every other room in that building. He looked uncertain. "There is a room," he said, in the careful way of someone choosing words that won't commit them to more than they intend to offer, "at the end of the North Hall. I go there sometimes in the evenings after long council sessions. It is quieter than the main sitting rooms." He stopped. "I thought perhaps you would want to come." It was a question. He had phrased it as a statement, but it arrived as a question, with the open, slightly tentative quality of something that wanted an answer and was not certain of getting one. Lyra had not expected that. She closed her book. The fire room at the end of the North Hall was small and stone-walled and built, from the look of it, for no purpose except warmth. Two old chairs angled toward a deep hearth, a long, narrow window looking out over the pine forest where the trees were enormous and dark in the early evening, the kind of darkness that felt inhabited rather than empty. Old wood smell, pine resin, and the specific smoky cleanliness of a hearth that had been used for years by someone who knew how to build a fire properly. Khan made tea without asking whether she wanted any, which should have been presumptuous, and which arrived instead as the kind of small, unconsidered kindness that only comes from people who are not thinking carefully enough about the gesture to make it a performance. He handed her a cup. He sat in the other chair. He looked at the fire for a moment. "What were you reading?" he asked. She told him. The border negotiations. The legal architecture underneath the Eastern trade agreements. The specific paragraph in the third Codex volume that suggested the resettlement provisions were not being implemented in the way the original agreement required, which meant that approximately 60 families in the outer Eastern settlements were technically entitled to resources they had never received. He asked a follow-up question, not the polite kind, the kind people asked to demonstrate they were listening while actually thinking about something else. The kind that came from genuine engagement, from actual attention to what she had said. He had heard the specific point about the 60 families and wanted to understand more about the resettlement provision discrepancy. This placed him several steps ahead of every council member she had raised the same question with, all of whom had redirected her toward the appropriate legal channels in the tone of people who had decided she was asking the wrong questions for the wrong reasons. They talked for 2 hours. She had not meant to stay 2 hours. She had told herself 20 minutes, perhaps 30, long enough to be a reasonable companion, and not so long as to suggest that she had been hopping for exactly this without knowing she was hopping for it. She stayed 2 hours because the conversation did not run out, and she forgot to monitor it. He came to the reading room doorway again 3 evenings later, and the week after that, and then without either of them formally deciding anything, the fire room became the place. The place that existed outside the protocols of the pack house, outside what their bond meant on paper and in the council minutes, and in the careful political language that everyone else in Dravenmore used when they discussed the arrangement. In the fire room they were not the Alpha and the Treaty Luna. They were simply two people who had found, with mutual and slightly startled surprise, that the other one was worth talking to. He told her things there that she understood instinctively were not things he said elsewhere. Not confessions, not dramatic unburdening, the smaller, quieter kind of honesty that slips through the gaps in a controlled person's composure when they have finally, without fully deciding to, stopped controlling things for the evening. He told her he had meant to be a healer before his father's death changed everything, that he still kept 2 of the medical texts in the bottom drawer of his desk and occasionally took them out. He told her that standing inside the pine forest in the hour before dawn made him feel something the walls of the pack house never had. He told her once, looking at the fire rather than her, that leading 3,000 people was the most completely isolating experience of his life, that the responsibility made it impossible to be honest with anyone, because honesty from an alpha was always interpreted as information rather than simply as a person talking. "I am not interpreting it," Lyra said. He looked at her. "I know," he said. "That is why I said it to you." She told him things too. Not everything. She still had her walls, and they had been built for good reasons, and she was not so far gone that she had forgotten what those reasons were. But she told him about her mother, gone since Lyra was 9, who had left behind a laugh that Lyra still caught in unexpected places, in the way certain kinds of light came through certain kinds of windows. She told him about the summer in the Asheville Hills with her father's older sister, who had taught her to track and hunt and read the land and had told her, while demonstrating how to make a fire in wet conditions, "You are considerably more capable than anyone has thought to tell you yet. Pay attention to that." She told him once, without intending to, that there were mornings when she stood at the window of the shared wing, and the distance between herself and everything she had come from felt so large it was almost physical. He was quiet for a moment after that. Then he said, with the careful honesty of a man choosing sincerity over comfort, "I have not told you enough that I understand what you gave up to come here." It was not a perfect thing, but it was genuine. She could hear the difference. After 7 weeks of listening to people in this house deliver well-constructed things, she had become very attuned to the sound of the genuine. She looked at him then, for the first time. Not at the surface of him, the composure and the alpha management and the careful presentation, but at the actual face underneath all of that, the one she had only ever seen glimpses of before this room gave her extended access to it. He looked back, and Lyra understood, in the specific, sinking, irrevocable way of someone who has stepped off something high without deciding to, that she was already in love with him. That she had been in the process of falling for weeks, quietly and without announcement, and that the falling was complete, and there was no longer any question of stopping it. She did not tell him. She told herself instead, very firmly, that telling him would be the single most dangerous thing she could do with something that precious. The evening that undid everything began the way a great many devastating evenings do, entirely ordinarily. Lyra had spent the day in the East Wing Records room, reviewing welfare files for the outer settlement families. It was work she had proposed to the council 6 weeks prior, had been redirected from twice, and had eventually begun on her own when it became clear that waiting for institutional support was going to be indefinitely inconclusive. The files were incomplete in ways that told a very specific story about what happens when nobody in a position of authority cares to look at them. She had been at it since the morning session and her eyes ached, and she was tired with the particular, satisfying quality of tiredness that comes from work that was real and needed. By the time she set the last file aside, the pack house had gone into its nighttime quiet. The long corridors were lit low, the bracket lamps turned to their overnight level, and the stone had taken on the deep cold that only settled in after midnight. The fire in the records room had gone to embers. Somewhere far below, she heard the distant, rhythmic sound of the night watch moving through his route, and then fading, swallowed by the enormous quiet that Dravenmore pack house produced after dark like a second structure built over the first. She was going to find Khan. Not because she had organized anything to say, not because she had prepared a speech or chosen her words in advance. She had tried that approach, internally, several times over the previous weeks, and the words always ended up sounding careful in a way that was the enemy of what she actually wanted to communicate. What she wanted to communicate was not careful. What she wanted to communicate was, "Those evenings are real to me. Whatever this is between us inside that fire room, it is real to me, and I have been pretending otherwise for long enough that the pretending has started to feel dishonest." She wanted to say that and then see what happened. She had decided, somewhere between the 43rd welfare file and the 44th, that tonight was the night. She walked through the north corridor toward the private sitting room adjacent to the council wing, where Khan spent his evenings after the late sessions wound down. Her feet were quiet on the stone. She had not stopped to put on heavier shoes, and the floor was cold through her slippers, but she barely registered it. She heard voices before she reached the door. The door was half open. She had not expected that. She stopped approximately 15 feet from it and stood in the dim corridor with the lamp bracket, throwing a stripe of amber light across the floor between her and the gap. And she told herself she should announce herself, should knock or call out or make enough noise that the occupants of the room would know someone was approaching. She did not do that. She stood still, because she heard her name. Vera's voice came through the gap first, carrying the low, deliberate quality of someone asking a question they have been building toward for a while. The girl follows you with her eyes at every gathering, Khan. She sits in that fire room with you every week, and she looks at you the way people look at things they are deciding to trust. A pause that had intention in it, the pause of someone who has placed a word and is waiting to see where it lands. I want to ask you something, not as your alpha mother. As the woman who raised you. Another pause, shorter this time. Do you actually love her? Silence. Lyra stood in the corridor and waited. She was very good at waiting. She had practiced it over years, the specific skill of holding the body completely still when everything inside it wants to move, of keeping the face quiet and the breathing even while the interior goes through something that has no quiet in it at all. She had used this skill in treaty rooms and difficult conversations, and in the months since she had arrived here and begun carrying something she had not allowed herself to name. She waited for him. She waited for him to say something that would tell her the fire room was what she thought it was, that the evenings were what she had let herself believe they were, that the look on his face when he appeared in the reading room doorway on Wednesday evenings, uncertain and open and genuinely, unguardedly glad, meant what it had felt like it meant. And then she heard the laugh. She would remember it for a very long time, not because it was a cruel sound, it was not cruel exactly, but because of what it was not. It was not the laugh of a man who found the question absurd. It was the laugh that lives in the gap between what someone actually feels and what they have decided they are allowed to feel. A short, deflecting sound. The sound of someone who has been asked about the most unmanaged thing inside them and whose defenses moved faster than their honesty. Then Khan's voice, smooth and returned completely to the council chamber register she had learned to recognize as the voice he used when the real thing was being put away. She is the Southern Bond, mother, Corin Stonehaven's daughter. She represents exactly what the territory needed and nothing more complicated than that. The corridor was very cold. Lyra had not noticed the cold before. She noticed it now. The stone floor through her thin slippers, the night air drifting from the window at the far end of the passage, the way the bracket lamp above her was flickering faintly, making the amber stripe across the floor waver. She waited. She told herself in the deep, controlled place where she handled the things that mattered, wait, he will say something else. He will add something. He will correct it. He said nothing. The silence expanded. It had edges, that silence. It pressed. Lyra lowered her hand, which she had raised toward the door without realizing. She looked at it for a moment. Then she turned around. She walked back through the north corridor at the same pace she had arrived, even and unhurried, and the stone was very cold beneath her feet and the lamps threw their amber stripes, and the walls breathed the old cold breath of Dravenmore at night all around her, and she did not hear any of it. She pressed one hand flat against her stomach as she walked. Just once. Just briefly. Just to feel the reality of what was there. The secret she had been carrying alone for 3 weeks and had been, tonight, finally ready to stop carrying alone. She had been coming to tell him she was pregnant. She went back to her room. She went inside. She stood in the center of it in the dark and she was very still and she waited again, this time for the feeling to announce what kind of feeling it was, because she needed to know that before she could decide what to do with it. It was not anger, or rather, the anger was present, but it was not the thing in charge. The thing in charge was older and quieter than anger. It was the specific, settling weight of a woman who has understood something she had been hopping not to understand, and who has understood it so completely that there is no longer any version of not having understood it. She stood in the dark for a while. Then she made a decision. She did not light a lamp. She had learned this room in the first week. the position of every piece of furniture, every drawer handle, every floorboard that shifted slightly under weight. She had done it the way she did everything she needed to rely on, thoroughly, in advance, before the need presented itself. She moved through the dark without error. She pulled the travel bag from the bottom of the wardrobe first. Old leather, soft from use, brought from her father's house because a woman who has been paying attention to adult rooms since childhood does not leave behind the things she might need. She set it on the bed and opened it in the dark. The packing took 11 minutes. She did not rush it, and she did not drag it out, because both of those things would have been a kind of performance, and there was no one left to perform for. Her mother's gray wool shawl went in first. It had lived in the cedar chest since Lyra arrived at Dravenmore, and the smell of the cedar had worked its way into the wool until it was difficult to separate. Underneath the cedar, if you pressed your face in far enough, there was still something else. Something older and softer, and specifically her mother's. Lyra pressed her face into it for exactly one breath, which was the only amount she allowed herself, and then she folded it with both hands and laid it in the bag. She took the hunting knife from the nightstand drawer. She took the coins she had been putting aside since the second month, not from any specific plan, but from the instinct of someone who grew up understanding that options require preparation and preparation requires time, and the time to begin preparing is always before you think you need to. She took 3 days of provisions from her personal stores. Her warmest boots, her tracking cloak, her compass, the small journal she had been keeping since she arrived at Dravenmore, which contained, among other things, 4 months of observations about the pack house that she had not allowed herself to do anything with yet. She stood at the dressing table. The jewelry box was small and dark wood, sent with her from the Asheville house. She opened it. The bonding ring sat at the center on a square of dark velvet. She had worn it every day for 4 months and 4 days. She had worn it to every gathering and every council session and every fire room evening. And sometimes in those evenings when she was sitting beside the hearth with her tea and Khan was talking about something real, she had touched the amber with the pad of her thumb without being aware she was doing it, in the absent, grounding way of someone holding onto a small, warm thing. She picked it up. The amber was warm even in the cold of the room at this hour. Warm the way good stone holds warmth, from somewhere deeper than the surface. She held it for a moment. Then she set it on the kitchen table. Not in the box, not in a drawer, not put away. On the table in the center, where the morning light would find it, where anyone looking for her would look first and find it instead. She set it there the way you set down a thing with intention rather than carelessness. She set it there because the ring was the Dravenmore Packhouse's claim on her, and she was not taking the Dravenmore Packhouse's claim on her with her when she went. She took the only other piece of jewelry she owned, a narrow chain with a pendant her mother had pressed into her palm the morning she left the Asheville house, a small wolf carved from pale river stone, smooth from years of handling. Her mother had said, pressing Lyra's fingers closed around it, "Whatever name they give you there, remember your own name first." Lyra fastened it around her neck and tucked it beneath her collar. She looked at the room one last time. The expensive furniture chosen for a Luna's room rather than for any particular Luna. The silk bedding in Dravenmore's colors. The window that faced north and showed, on clear evenings, the distant upper edge of the pine forest where she and Khan had sometimes stood together after the fire room evenings and talked for a few minutes more before the night required them to go their separate directions. She looked at the window for exactly as long as it took to make herself stop looking. Then she picked up her bag and walked out of her room and through the corridor and down the long stairs and across the main hall, and the pack house breathed its cold, indifferent breath around her, and the stone was quiet under her feet, and she did not make a sound, and she did not look at anything she did not need to look at to get where she was going. The night guard at the western gate was Bran Coldwater. He was young, 25, perhaps a year older, with the open, honest face of someone who had not yet decided to be strategic about his expressions, which meant his face still showed what he was thinking while he was thinking it. He had been on the night rotation for 2 months. Lyra knew his name because she had made it a point in the first month to learn the name of every wolf who stood in the cold so that people like her could feel safe. He saw her coming from 30 feet. She watched him understand. Not all at once, not quickly, but in the specific settling way of a wolf whose senses were delivering information his mind was working to make sense of. The travel bag on her shoulder, the bare left hand, the expression on her face, which was not distressed and not uncertain, and which was, she knew, the thing that told him more than anything else. He stood very still for 4 seconds. Then he stepped aside. "Safe roads, Luna," he said, very quietly, only for the dark space between them. Lyra met his eyes and held them for a moment. "Thank you, Bran," she said. "Go home safe yourself." She walked through the gate. The pine forest accepted her the way forests accept everything, completely and without ceremony. The trees closed around the road behind her, and the pack house disappeared from view, and Lyra was alone with the dark and the cold, and the specific, clean feeling of having finally moved toward something true after 4 months of standing still inside something that was not. She walked for the rest of the night. She did not once look back. The outer territories east of Dravenmoor were not hospitable in any conventional sense. They were wild in the way that land becomes wild when it has been left to its own decisions long enough, which is to say they were logical and patterned and entirely comprehensible, but only to someone willing to learn their logic rather than impose a different one. The terrain shifted between old dense forest and open rocky ground without explaining itself. The streams ran where the land told them to rather than where people found convenient. The animals moved through the trees with the unhurried confidence of things that understood they were native, and you were not. Lyra found all of this deeply, specifically settling. She had spent 4 months in a house that required a curated version of her, the version that was appropriate and measured and careful not to take up more space than the Treaty Luna position had allocated for her. Out here, the land had no opinion about the Treaty Luna. It was interested only in whether she could read its signs and navigate its patterns and make decisions that accounted for what was actually true rather than what was convenient. She could do these things. She had always been able to do them. The previous 4 months had simply given her very little opportunity to remember that. She found the stone shepherd's shelter on the second evening, 3 miles beyond the second ridge, where a rocky outcropping had been built into a modest structure by someone who had needed shelter in this place long enough to do something permanent about it. She checked it carefully before committing to it. Roof intact over the main room. Floor solid. Stone hearth in the north wall, chimney clear. Door that hung slightly wrong in the frame but sealed fully when pushed. Not good by the standard of the Dravenmoor pack house. Entirely adequate by the standard of someone who needed a defensible place to sleep and enough time to build something better. She said to no one, "This will do." Then she built a fire and organized her provisions and set a tripcord perimeter around the exterior and went to sleep. For 3 days, she allowed herself to be tired. She still did the necessary things. She gathered wood and checked the shelter and maintained the perimeter and organized her stores. But she stopped performing adequacy for an audience that was not there, and what lived under the performance turned out to be a depth of exhaustion she had not let herself measure while she was still inside the pack house. She slept in long, unbroken stretches. She woke to birdsong and pine smell and the particular quality of morning in a forest that has no interest in your schedule. She sat on the stone step outside the shelter door with her tea and watched the light arrive through the trees and did not require the first hour of each day to be productive. On the 5th morning, she noticed that she was not afraid. That was the thing. She was grieving, yes. The laugh was with her still, arriving in the quiet moments with its specific, complete cruelty. The image of her hand raised to knock on that door, of the thing she had been carrying toward him, was with her constantly. The understanding of what she had almost said and what she had heard instead sat in her chest the way a bruise sits somewhere you keep forgetting until you move in a way that finds it. But underneath all of that, she was not afraid. She worked. She improved the shelter systematically, reinforcing the door, extending the perimeter, finding the stream half a mile east and establishing a route to it that minimized open ground. She built a second shelf on the east wall when the first one proved inexact. She started a small herb garden in a split piece of bark on the south windowsill. She hunted with the knife and the cord traps her aunt had taught her. She gathered edible plants from the forest floor, the specific varieties she had memorized at 14, because her aunt had believed in memorizing things before you needed them. She realized slowly, very good at this. Not just surviving, better than surviving. She was building, and the building was coming from something in her that had been waiting, quietly and with considerable patience, for 4 months of being the treaty Luna to be finished so that it could get back to work. On the 8th day, she walked to the outer settlement market. The market was a practical, unpretentious arrangement of stalls at the edge of a cluster of timber buildings. She was examining dried herbs when the woman at the center stall said, without any greeting whatsoever, "How far along are you?" Lyra went still. The woman was somewhere in her 40s, with short gray-streaked hair and weathered hands and bright, direct eyes that performed their assessments without asking permission. Her name, Lyra would learn, was Marin Ashford, and she had been reading wolves in the outer settlements long enough that she had stopped being polite about what she read. "Your scent," Marin said in the patient, informational tone of someone delivering a fact. "8 weeks, give or take. I have been doing this long enough to know the difference." She looked at Lyra directly. "Are you eating properly?" Lyra was standing in an outdoor market in the outer territories, 8 days out from the Dravenmore pack house, with a travel bag and a Riverstone pendant, and no ring on her left hand. And she was pregnant. She had known this, in the way you know things your body has been telling you before your mind has decided to confirm them. The particular fatigue of the early weeks, the heightened sharpness of everything, the way the pine forest had seemed almost overwhelmingly vivid on the 3rd day of travel, too bright, too alive, too present. She had known, and she had been turning it over daily, and she had been carrying it the way she carried the other secret, alone, getting used to its weight. And she had been coming to tell him. That was the part that kept arriving. She had been walking toward that door with this specific thing held against her chest, finally ready to stop carrying it alone, and she had heard that laugh. She sat down on the low wall at the edge of the market, without fully deciding to. Marin appeared beside her 2 minutes later with a second cup of tea. She set it on the wall next to Lyra's hand without comment or question, with the practical, undemonstrative kindness of someone who had learned that the best thing you can offer a person in certain moments is something warm and the absence of expectation. They sat in the morning market noise for a while without speaking. "You are going to manage," Marin said eventually. She said it the way she said everything, as information rather than encouragement. "You look like someone who has managed things before." "Yes," Lyra said. And sitting on that wall with the tea between her palms and the full, real weight of what was inside her settling into her bones, she was not lying. She would manage. She had always managed. She had simply not known, until this moment, how important it was going to be that she was genuinely good at it. She walked back to the shelter with the herbs and the ginger root and 2 additional lengths of cord for the perimeter. She hung the herbs on the iron hook above the hearth. She put more wood on the fire. She pressed both hands against her flat stomach and talked to the baby in the quiet, direct way she talked to all the things that mattered to her, without performance, without decoration, as herself. "I know this is not what either of us planned," she said. "I am working on it. I need you to trust that." The fire was warm. She meant every word. In the days that followed, Lyra built a life from the materials available to her. She hunted, she gathered, she improved the shelter by small degrees daily. She found that the work organized her thinking in ways that the palace sitting and the formal gatherings never had. Out here, problems were concrete and solutions were physical, and the feedback was immediate. The shelf either held or it didn't. The trap either caught something or it didn't. The perimeter either gave warning or it didn't. She preferred this kind of honesty to the kind that wore formal clothes. The baby announced itself more insistently as the days passed, not dramatically but reliably, a deepening physical reality that her body kept presenting in small, unmistakable ways. She fed herself carefully, not because her own appetite was strong, the grief had complicated that, but because the baby needed it, and the baby's needs had become the most organizing principle of her days. One afternoon, near the end of the second week, she was sitting on the shelter step mending a tear in her cloak with a bone needle and thread she had found in the single small drawer the shelter contained. She was not thinking about anything in particular. The forest was quiet. The light was that particular flat gray of an overcast afternoon that gives everything equal, shadowless definition. And then she felt it. So faint she almost missed it. A flutter, the kind that could be dismissed as her own heartbeat rearranging itself, or the wind, or simply nothing. Then it came again. Her hands went still on the cloak. She sat without moving, barely breathing, and waited. It came a third time, unmistakably, something that was not her, separate and small and stubbornly, insistently present, making itself known in the only way it currently had available. Lyra set the cloak down very carefully on the step beside her. She pressed both hands against her stomach. Her eyes filled, not with the grief she had been carrying since the corridor, not with the kind of tears that had been waiting for a moment of weakness, with something else entirely, something warm and enormous and arriving completely by surprise, the specific emotion of a person who has been alone with something very large for a very long time and has just, for the first time, been answered. "Hello," she whispered. The flutter came again, as if in reply, and Lyra, who had not cried once since walking through the western gate, sat on the crooked step of a leaning shelter in the outer territories and laughed. A real laugh, sudden and unguarded, and let the tears fall with it. And felt, for the first time since the corridor, that the future was not something to endure but something to move toward. "I have been waiting to meet you," she said softly. "We have some things to figure out still, you and I, but we are going to be fine. I need you to know that. Even if you cannot hear me yet, I need to say it to someone." She picked up the cloak and went back to her mending. Khan did not sleep past dawn. He had not allowed himself this in 6 years of leading the Dravenmore pack, through 2 territorial crises and 1 severe winter emergency, and approximately 1,400 council sessions that required him to be fully functional from the first hour. He was dressed, and at his desk before the household staff had finished their first corridor round, working through the morning reports with the reliable efficiency of someone who had made consistency the most fundamental thing about himself. Which was why, when his aide appeared in the study doorway at 7:15, with the expression of a man delivering information considerably heavier than his usual load, Khan noticed immediately. He registered the expression before the words. He was setting down his pen by the time the aide began to speak. "Alpha, Luna Lyra did not sleep in her room last night." The aide's voice had the controlled quality of someone choosing each word separately. The chamber was empty when her morning attendant arrived. The bed had been used briefly but left. Bran Coldwater on the western gate reports the Luna passed through sometime before first light on foot, carrying a bag. He paused. He had one more thing and he was deciding how to say it. "The bonding ring is on the kitchen table." Khan stood. He walked to the shared wing without stopping to arrange his face. The door to her room was unlocked. He pushed it open. The room was exactly as it always appeared from the doorway. Impeccable. Every surface in its correct position, every object in its designated place. The silk bedding straightened, the curtains pulled back to their morning position, the dressing table arranged with the same careful order she always maintained. Nothing dramatic, nothing thrown or displaced. He stepped inside. He stood in the center of the room and looked at it the way he had never bothered to look at it before. Not as a space he was responsible for providing, but as a place where a person had been living, where the small, particular evidence of a specific person's presence had accumulated over 4 months in the ways that people leave themselves in rooms whether or not they intend to. The history book on the nightstand, the kind she read when she was trying to understand something practically rather than academically. The folded letter from her father, not locked away, resting on the desk where it could be accessed easily, consulted often. The dried rosemary stem on the windowsill, brought in from somewhere, placed there because it meant something. He went to the kitchen. The ring was in the center of the table. He had not looked at it closely since the jeweler presented it before the bonding ceremony, because after the ceremony it had been on her finger, and he had been managing his awareness of it along with everything else he had been managing. He picked it up. The amber was warm, still faintly warm, the specific warmth of a hand that had held something recently and had then, deliberately and with full intention, set it down. He stood in her kitchen holding the ring and felt something in his chest that his composure had no adequate system for. Something that had started when the aide said the words and had been building with every step from the study to this room. He put the ring in his coat pocket. He found Bran Coldwater in the lower guard station. Bran gave him the full account, the time, the bag, the composure on her face, which he described with the careful precision of someone who understood the difference between composure as control and composure as a decision that has already been made and implemented. She had known what she was doing. She had not been driven out in distress. She had walked through that gate as a woman who had made a decision and was carrying it through. "She thanked me," Bran said. He said it in the particular way of someone for whom this detail mattered more than it should have, in the way that small, unexpected dignities tend to matter. "She used my name." Khan heard that. "Did she say anything else?" "No, Alpha." Bran paused, in the way of a young wolf deciding whether to add something. He added it. She looked like someone who had finished deciding a long time before she reached the gate. The decision was done. She was just walking. Khan thanked him and went to his mother's chambers. He had been in Vera's rooms at all hours over the course of his life. He knew what her presence looked like in that space. She looked up when he came in. She registered the expression on his face. She set her pen down. "Lyra is gone," he said. Vera's face did not change. That was the thing that landed first, before anything he said, before he had opened his mouth. His mother's face did not change when he told her his mate was gone. It did not shift with surprise or alarm or the reflexive concern that crosses a face when unexpected news arrives. It held still, in the way of someone receiving information they had been, in some part of themselves, prepared to receive. "What did you do?" he said. Vera set her pen down with the precise movement of someone who has known this conversation was coming and has decided how they intend to conduct themselves inside it. Then she told him, all of it. She had heard Lyra's footsteps in the corridor at 10:30. She had known for weeks that Lyra came to find him in the evenings, had known what the fire room had become, had known what was building in those evenings with a clarity that Khan himself had been carefully not examining. She had chosen the question deliberately. She had chosen the moment because she had known that his default response, the political framing, the council language, the particular retreat into managed distance that he had been practicing since he was 22 and needed it to run a pack, would sound to Lyra like his true position rather than what it actually was. Which was a reflex, a hiding place, not the truth. "You knew she was in the corridor," Khan said. "Yes." "You aimed it at her." Vera straightened. "I protected." "What?" His voice was very quiet, the quiet of something under significant pressure. "What were you protecting? Tell me, in plain words. What was worth engineering a moment that pushed the person who lives in this house out of it into the dark?" Something moved in Vera's expression, something small and real and not entirely composed. "I did not believe she would leave," she said. And for the first time in that room, the controlled voice had something underneath it that was not controlled. "I thought she would confront you. I thought there would be an argument. I thought I would understand from that argument where you actually were." "I know," Khan said, "because you did not see her properly. You decided what she was in the first month and never looked again." He was at the door when Cade found him in the corridor outside. Cade was his head tracker, compact and methodical, a man who communicated through the precise calibration of his expressions. His expression right now communicated something considerably worse than everything already on the table. An informant from the outer eastern settlement had come forward that morning. 3 nights before Lyra left the pack house, a woman, dark-haired and high-standing, had approached him and paid him well to carry a message to a group of wolves in the outer territories. The message described a southern wolf traveling alone. The instruction was simple: ensure she did not return to the northern pack. The description of the woman matched Riven Kaelwyn exactly. His territorial advisor, 3 years of service, a polished, professionally neutral presence at every council session who had always spoken about the Southern bond with the careful detachment of someone who found the subject adequately unimportant. Cade had more. Riven had been feeding intelligence to the Graven faction in the northeast for the better part of a year. Border patrol schedules, pack population data, the Alpha's documented decision patterns in territorial negotiations. She had been building a picture of internal Dravenmore vulnerability, and she had used Lyra's departure as both a personal victory and a strategic asset. Lyra had not simply been failed by a husband who panicked at the wrong moment. She was out in the outer territories, alone and pregnant, with hired wolves moving toward her specific location. Khan read the report. He sat with it for the length of one breath. Riven Kaelwyn is removed from every position she holds and placed under guard immediately, he said. Riker Ironville holds administrative duties until I return. He looked at Cade. I am going myself. 2 trackers only. No pack colors. We leave within the hour. He packed in 15 minutes. The working knife he had carried since 17, 8 days of provisions, his compass, a small lamp. Before he left, he went back to her kitchen and stood where the ring had been. He reached into his coat pocket. He curled his fist around the amber ring and felt the stone, cold now, the residual warmth entirely gone. He had spent 4 months calling what existed in that fire room a convenient arrangement. He had used the council language, because the council language was where he went when the real thing felt too large and too unmanaged to say directly. He had laughed when his mother asked him about love, because the alternative was admitting, in that moment, to the most undefended thing inside him. And Lyra had been in the corridor. He walked out of the pack house through the western gate and moved north and east into the pine forest, and he did not stop moving until he found her. The outer territories in the gray, early autumn light had the specific quality of a place that had been doing its own business long before anyone thought to pass through it, and intended to continue doing so long after. Khan tracked the way he had been taught as a boy, low and patient, reading the language of disturbed ground and bent vegetation, and sent on still air that most people no longer knew how to speak. He was good at this. He had been good at this long before he was good at council sessions and territorial negotiations. Tracking had come first. Tracking was honest in a way that very little else in his life had been permitted to be. The first sign was a heel impression in soft earth near a stream crossing. Small and light-footed, pressing deeper on the right side, the specific weight distribution of someone moving quickly while trying to conserve energy. He crouched beside it for a moment. She was moving northeast. She was staying off the main paths. She was doing everything correctly for someone who did not want to be found. He found the cave on the second day. Cold ash barely visible against the rock floor, one shallow body impression in the earth where someone had sat with their back against the wall through the cold of a first night. Her scent, still present, still clear enough that his wolf registered it with the specific, urgent quality of something being told important information. She had slept here, alone, the night she left. He crouched in the cave entrance and looked at the cold ash and the impression of her, and the way the rock still held the faint trace of her presence, and something in his chest that he had been keeping organized since the morning. He picked up the ring from the kitchen table, stopped cooperating with the organization entirely. 2 nights ago, Cade said from behind him, reading the signs. Moving well, consistent direction. She learned to track in the Asheville Hills, Khan said, from her father's older sister. He had not known he was going to say that until it was said. The knowledge had come from the fire room, from one of the evenings when she had told him something real, and it was simply there, filed in the same place as all the other things he had been storing without fully realizing he was storing them. She was taught well, Cade said. Yes, Khan said, she was. They moved for 4 more days. The scent trail grew stronger with each mile, which meant they were closing the distance, not because Lyra was slowing, but because they were moving more directly than she had been, without the need for concealment. On the 5th day, they reached the outer settlement market, and a short, direct woman who gave her name as Marin Ashford told them, with the unvarnished efficiency of someone who communicated only in facts, that a dark-haired, well-born young woman had come through 8 days prior, bought ginger root and dried herbs, paid in good coin, and asked sensible questions about what she was buying. She seemed like someone who knew how to take care of herself, Marin said. She was looking at Khan directly in the specific way of someone delivering information that is also a verdict. I told her she was managing well. She seemed like someone who needed to hear it. Khan was quiet. Thank you, he said. Find her, Marin said, but find her right, not with what you want to say, with what she needs to hear. He moved northeast from the market. On the 6th day, Cade located smoke above the tree line, thin and carefully controlled, the specific signature of a small fire managed by someone who needed warmth without drawing attention. They approached from downwind. Khan scented her from 300 yards and his wolf went completely, suddenly still. The specific stillness of a thing that has been moving urgently for 6 days and has finally arrived where it was going. He also scented the other wolves. 2 of them approaching the shelter from the south in the slow, deliberate pattern of a purposeful circuit, not curious, not passing through, assessing the exits, testing the structure, communicating in the wordless way of wolves who had a target and were not in a hurry about reaching it. Everything in Khan shifted at once, from the organized, careful energy of a man tracking across difficult terrain to the clean, immediate certainty of an alpha whose wolf has identified a threat to something that matters. He moved through the trees without sound. He came through the south side of the clearing at speed, and placed himself between the 2 wolves and the shelter door before either of them had completed their assessment of his position. Both of them went very still. He looked at them with the particular quiet of someone who does not need to raise his voice, because everything else about his presence has already communicated everything necessary. "Who sent you?" he said. The older one had the calculating eyes of a wolf who had survived the outer territories by reading situations accurately and quickly. He read this one in approximately 5 seconds. "Kaelwyn woman," he said, "Northern Pack, high standing, paid us to ensure the Southern Luna did not return. And if she chose to return regardless." The silence was the answer. Khan looked at both of them with the complete, settled authority of someone who has arrived past the point where discussion is appropriate. "Leave," he said. "Now, if either of you comes within 3 days' travel of this location again, I will not ask questions first." They left. He tracked their footsteps until the forest absorbed them completely. Then he turned around. She was standing in the open door of the shelter. She had a knife in her right hand, held correctly, thumb along the spine, weight shifted forward onto her front foot. She was wearing her traveling cloak over working clothes and her dark hair had come loose from the road. She looked, in every way that the Dravenmore pack house would have measured its Luna, nothing like what was expected of her. She looked like Lyra. He said her name. He had prepared words. He had been building them for 6 days, organizing them with the same intention he brought to everything that mattered, laying out the approach carefully, leaving nothing to chance. The words were ready. They were as honest as he knew how to make them. Her name left him without any of the preparation attached to it. Just her name, carrying everything it had been carrying since the morning he picked up her ring from the kitchen table and felt, in the residual warmth of the stone, the specific weight of what he had failed to say when he had the chance. She looked at him. She did not lower the knife. "Khan," she said. Her voice was steady with the specific, practiced quality of someone who has been deciding how they would conduct this moment long before it arrived. "Who were they?" she asked. He told her everything. Riven's involvement, the informant, the intelligence leak, the full picture of what had been operating underneath the surface of his council and his household and his territory, using her departure as a piece in a larger design. He told her Riven had been removed and placed under guard, that council charges were being prepared, that the territory was being managed by Riker Ironville in his absence. She took each piece of information and processed it with the quiet, methodical efficiency she applied to everything she took seriously. Then she asked, "Why did you come yourself?" "Because you left because of what I said," he told her, "and sending someone else would have been exactly the kind of managed distance that has cost me everything I actually cared about." He moved to the edge of the clearing, close enough that there was no space left between them to misread what was said in it. "You were in that corridor to find me. You came to tell me something. Instead, you heard me laugh." She looked at him steadily. "That laugh," he said. "I need you to understand what it actually was." He stopped. He had prepared this part too, and it had survived the journey north intact because it was true, and true things are harder to lose than constructed ones. It was fear. The specific, involuntary sound of a man who has spent 22 years deciding that needing people was the most dangerous thing an alpha could do, and who had, without planning it and without being able to stop it, needed someone. My mother asked me a direct question about the most unmanaged thing in my life, and the part of me that had spent 2 decades learning not to have unmanaged things produce that sound before the rest of me could respond. He paused. "And then I used the council language because the council language is where I go when something is too real to handle directly. I've been going there since I was 22, and I need to stop." Lyra was quiet. She was listening in the way she listened to things that mattered, entirely, without any part of her attention elsewhere. "The fire room evenings," he said. "All of them. What you told me about your mother and the summer in the Asheville Hills and the 60 families that the resettlement provision failed. What I told you about the medical texts and the pine forest at first light, and what it actually feels like to be responsible for 3,000 lives. None of that was the Alpha managing the Treaty Luna. It was me. Actually me, sitting beside a person I had not expected to find and not being willing to leave." He looked at her without anything managed in his expression. "I was falling in love with you. I had been since the second evening in that room, when you told me about the structural gap in the 3rd Codex volume with the specific energy of someone who had been trying to bring that gap to someone's attention for weeks and had not been heard. And then you looked at me with the expression of someone deciding whether I was going to be different. I have been trying, since that moment, to be worth that look." He reached into his coat pocket. He held out the ring. The amber caught the late afternoon light immediately, deep and warm and specific, like last light held inside old stone. "I should have said yes," he said. "She asked me if I loved you, and the answer was yes. The answer had been yes for weeks before she asked, and it is yes now, and it will be yes for the rest of my life. I am not asking you to forget what you heard. I am asking you to know what was actually true underneath it, and to give me the chance to spend everything that comes after this ensuring you never have cause to doubt it." Lyra looked at the ring in his palm. The clearing was very quiet. The pine forest around them had the specific stillness of a place that has been holding something in and has finally allowed it to settle. She looked at the ring for a long time. "I am pregnant," she said. Khan went very still. 8 weeks, she continued. Her voice was steady in the way of someone who has had time to arrive at this and deliver it clearly. I found out before I left. I have been managing it carefully. The baby is well. She met his eyes. I was coming to tell you that night. That is why I was in the corridor. I had been carrying it alone for 3 weeks, and I had finally decided that I could not carry it alone any longer. He understood, in the full and irreversible way that understanding sometimes arrives, what she had been walking toward down that corridor, what she had been ready to offer him, what she had heard instead of reaching him. He crossed the clearing. He held her, not as an alpha holds a political bond, not as a man managing an arrangement or fulfilling a responsibility. He held her the way you hold someone you have tracked through 6 days of difficult territory and your own considerable failures, with the specific, complete intention of someone who has identified the most important thing and is not going to be careless with it again. Lyra's hand found the front of his coat. She gripped the fabric. Her forehead went against his shoulder, and she exhaled, long and slow and enormous, the release of something she had been holding alone since the moment she turned around in that corridor and began to walk away. They stood in the clearing while the afternoon light moved through the trees, golden and indifferent and beautiful. After a long while, Lyra pulled back enough to look at him. "I am not going back as a bond," she said. "I am finished with that version." "You are going back as my mate," he said, "as the mother of our child, as the person who is my equal in every room of that pack house and every decision in that territory." He looked at her directly, not because the council ratifies it, because it is true. Lyra looked at the ring in his palm. She reached out. She took it. She slid it onto her own finger, and the amber warmed immediately on her skin as though it had been waiting. "Then we do things differently from here," she said. "Yes," he said, "we do." She glanced back at the shelter behind her, at the herb garden on the windowsill and the reinforced door, and the firewood stacked against the south wall in the neat, systematic way of someone who had been doing this long enough to develop a method. "You should see inside," she said. "I built a shelf." "How does it hold?" "Perfectly level," she said. "The first one wasn't. I rebuilt it." "The first ones rarely are," he said. Something moved in her expression, not quite a smile yet, but oriented in that direction, the specific, careful beginning of something warming. She picked up her bag. They walked north through the evening forest with their hands joined, and the trees accepted them the way the trees accepted everything, without opinion, without ceremony, simply making room. They came back through the western gate on a clear morning when the light had the particular clean quality that belongs to autumn leaning toward winter, bright and specific, and without softness, the kind of light that makes everything it touches look deliberately chosen. Khan had sent no announcement ahead. He had sent one message to Cade: "Prepare the Great Hall, all pack members welcome." Nothing more. He had walked away from Dravenmore through the western gate 11 days ago without ceremony, and he was walking back through the same gate with his mate beside him and her hand in his, and the shape of that was the only statement he intended to make. The Great Hall had filled by the time they arrived. Pack members had gathered in the loose, self-organizing way of a community that has been living inside uncertainty for 11 days and has decided, without instruction, that it is not going to miss this. The council stood near the Alpha's table with the carefully managed expressions of people who have been reassessing a situation they thought they understood. Senior wolves, junior household staff. Bran Coldwater near the back wall with the open, honest face of a wolf, who had been waiting for this moment since the night he stepped aside at the western gate and said safe roads. Vera Dravenmore stood to the left of the council, slightly separate from them, with the stillness of a woman who had spent 11 days inside her own choices and had not tried to run from a single hour of them. Lyra saw her. Vera saw Lyra. Neither of them looked away. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. Too much stood between them for forgiveness to be the first thing. It was something more foundational than that. Two women looking at each other fully, across a room full of their pack, as the real and complete people they actually were, without the constructed versions of themselves standing in the way. The beginning of something that would require considerable time and honesty to become anything more. But it was a beginning, and Lyra had always understood that beginnings were where everything that lasted started. Khan addressed the hall. "My mate has come home," he said. His voice reached the far stone walls without effort, with the authority of a man who had earned the sound of it in every difficult room he had ever occupied. He said nothing else. Then he stepped back and gave her the floor. The entire hall shifted. Several council members exchanged glances. Bran Coldwater straightened slightly at the back. Lyra looked at the assembled pack. She was in her traveling clothes with her cloak still carrying the smell of the outer territories. She had not changed because there was nothing about her appearance she intended to apologize for. She had spent 4 months in this house performing the curated version of herself, and she had used up everything she had available for that version. What was left was simply Lyra, tired and clear-eyed, and exactly who she had always been underneath all the careful management. "You know how I arrived here," she said. Her voice was even and entirely clear. "As a bond, a territorial solution, a political answer shaped like a person, and for 4 months I tried to be adequate to that description. I attended everything required and smiled when I was supposed to smile and kept everything real about myself in a very small and very carefully managed space." She paused. "I left because I was made to understand that the bond was the only thing that was real here. I came back because I decided it did not have to stay that way." The hall was very quiet. "Not because anyone invited me to, not because the terms require it." She pressed one hand briefly against the front of her coat. "Because I chose to. Because this pack deserves a Luna who shows up for it as a real person rather than a ceremonial function. And because I am going to build something honest here with my mate, and I would like the help of the people in this room to do it." She looked at the faces, all of them. "I am not asking for your approval," she said. "I am telling you who I am. I am asking whether you will do the work with me." The silence that followed lasted 5 full seconds. Bran Coldwater broke it from the back of the hall in a voice quiet and entirely clear. "We are glad you came back, Luna." And then Marin Ashford, who had arrived at Dravenmore Pack House by methods Lyra had not yet had time to investigate, from her position near the east wall. "Dravenmore is better for it." The response that moved through the hall after that was not unanimous. There were faces that held back, wolves who would need demonstrated evidence over time before they offered anything real. That was honest. That was appropriate. Lyra had not come back expecting a unanimous welcome. She had come back expecting to do work, and work was honest about what it required. Khan's hand found hers at her side. She turned to look at him. He was watching her with the expression that had first appeared in the fire room on a Wednesday evening, the one that looked nothing like an alpha managing a situation, and entirely like a person who had stopped pretending something was smaller than it actually was. "They heard you," he said quietly. "They chose to," she said. "That is the difference." In the weeks that followed, Dravenmore Pack House became something different from what it had been. Not through grand announcements or dramatic restructuring. Through the accumulation of small, consistent choices made daily in the direction of something more honest, until the pattern those choices formed became undeniable. Lyra took the council seat Khan formalized in the first week. A full voting seat with real authority, not consultative and not ceremonial. 3 council members submitted written objections. Khan heard every one with genuine attention and confirmed the seat without modification. "She is my equal," he said in the council chamber to the room, in the voice he used for positions that were finished rather than open. "That is permanent." She organized the outer settlement welfare review she had begun before she left, completed it, submitted a formal report to the full council, and built a support system for the settlement families the resettlement provision had failed. She established twice-weekly meetings with rotating groups of ordinary pack families who had never had direct access to anyone in the Luna's position. These meetings were not ceremonial. She took notes. She followed up. She also met with Vera. In the fire room, it felt like the right place for conversations that needed to be honest. Vera arrived first. She sat in the chair that was not Lyra's, and Lyra noticed this and understood it as a deliberate offering of a particular kind. "You knew I was in the corridor," Lyra said. "Yes," Vera said. "I want the honest reason, not the one that sounds like protection." The silence was long enough to be genuine rather than strategic. "Fear," Vera said at last. "I watched him change during those weeks with you. He became open in a way I had not seen since before his father died and the pack needed him to close. And I was afraid of what it meant for the shape of my own world if someone had become more necessary to him than I was." She looked at the fire. "That is the honest reason. I know it is not sufficient." "No," Lyra said, "it isn't, but it is true, and true things are where you start." Vera looked at her for a long moment. "You are," she said at last, with something in her voice that was not the controlled surface, "considerably more than I chose to see." "I know," Lyra said. "You will have time to see it properly now." It was not forgiveness. Not yet. It was the first honest thing that had existed between them, without the constructed versions of each other standing in the way, and that was the only foundation from which anything real could ever be built. Khan reorganized the council within the first 2 weeks. Those members most thoroughly aligned with Riven Kaelwyn's influence were retired with formal courtesy and practical finality. He brought in new voices, wolves known for telling the truth in rooms where the truth was inconvenient, wolves who had been recommended by the people they had worked with rather than by people in positions of power. He also instituted a formal requirement that any decision affecting pack families had to include the Luna's input before ratification. Several remaining council members objected to this. Khan heard their concerns with genuine attention and confirmed the requirement without modification. "She is my equal in this," he said. "That position is not negotiable." He meant it. Lyra, watching him in council sessions, saw that he meant it, not because he was performing meaning for her benefit, but because something had shifted in how he understood the work. He consulted her not only because the requirement existed, but because her perspective consistently revealed things that the existing frameworks had missed. She had arrived at Dravenmore from the outside, from the other side of a territorial conflict, from a position where she had nothing to gain by presenting comfortable fictions to power. She saw what was actually there, and she said so. "You should have had someone like me in that room from the beginning," she told him once, in their shared study in the late evening while she was reviewing resettlement files, and he was reading patrol reports, the fire burning low between them. "I should have had you," he said, without looking up from his pages. "Specifically." She looked at him, he looked up. "Is that too much?" he asked. "No," she said, "it is exactly right." She went back to her files. "Don't make a thing of it." "I wasn't going to." He went back to his reports. After a moment, "I like this." "What?" "This, working next to you in the evenings. It is my favorite part of the day." She considered this for a moment. "Mine too," she said. "Don't make a thing of that either." "Understood." The baby arrived on a clear morning in early spring, when the pine forest had gone brilliantly green, and the pack house smelled of new things beginning. She came into the world with an opinion about her arrival and the clear intention of sharing it immediately, which Marin, who had established herself as the pack house's new senior healer with the quiet efficiency of someone who had identified an available position and the qualifications to fill it, observed, was the most encouraging possible sign. She had Lyra's eyes. She had Khan's jaw, which Marin noted without elaborating. She arrived having already formed preliminary conclusions about the world and intending to make them known at the earliest available opportunity. Khan sat on the edge of the bed with his shoulder pressed against Lyra's, looking at his daughter with the expression of a man who has spent 22 years learning to contain what he feels, and has finally, in this moment, put the container down entirely and does not intend to pick it back up. "Hello," he said to the baby, quietly, in the voice he used for the things that actually mattered. The baby turned toward the sound with the focused attention of someone receiving important information and processing it for future reference. "She knows you," Lyra said. "Already?" "She has been listening to you for months." Lyra looked at him. "Every evening after the fire room, when you thought I was asleep. You talked to her." He was quiet for a moment. "I said important things." "I heard you. I meant all of them." The baby made a sound that communicated, with remarkable clarity for someone so recently arrived in the world, that she had registered this and had responses she intended to deliver at the appropriate time. Lyra laughed, a real laugh arriving without warning, unguarded and bright, the kind her mother used to produce in unexpected places that Lyra had been quietly looking for since she was 9 years old. Khan turned to look at her. She was exhausted and entirely, quietly full in the way of someone who has stopped performing her life and started living it. And the difference between those two things was enormous and visible and deeply, specifically her own. "She is going to be a great deal," Lyra said. "Takes after her mother," Khan said. "Accurately observed," she said. "Don't make a thing of it." "Never," he said. They named her Liz. Many months later, when the pack house had found its new shape, and the council operated differently, and the outer settlement families had formal representation at the quarterly reviews, and the connected door between the chambers had stood open long enough that no one remembered which side the curtain had originally hung on, Lyra went back to the fire room alone. Not because she had been avoiding it, because building real things takes the kind of time that does not leave much room for being sentimental about the spaces where the building started. She was ready now. She sat in her chair. She made tea. She looked at the fire burning in the deep hearth and the pine forest dark and enormous through the long window, the same forest she had walked into the night she left with her bag and her mother's shawl and her father's coins and the river stone pendant around her neck, which looked completely different from this side of everything that had happened since. She thought about the kitchen table, the ring sitting in the center of it in the dark, the sound of her own feet on the stone as she walked away from the life she had been trying to believe in. She thought about the stone shelter in the outer territories, the tripcord perimeter, the herb garden starting in a split piece of bark on the south windowsill. The afternoon she sat on the step and felt the baby move for the first time and laughed, and let the tears fall with it, and understood that the future was not something to endure but something to move toward. She thought about the clearing, Khan's voice saying her name with nothing managed in it, just her name, carrying everything it had been carrying for 6 days and finally being set down. She thought about what it meant to come back to a place on your own terms. How entirely different it was from simply arriving. How a place could be the same stone and timber, and the same fire in the same hearth, and the same pine forest beyond the same window, and yet be a completely different world depending on who you were when you came to it, and what you had decided to bring in with you. She heard footsteps in the north corridor. She did not look up because she already knew. Khan sat in the other chair. He looked at the fire for a moment, then he looked at her. She was already looking at him. "You went quiet," he said. "I was thinking about the corridor," she said. He was still not the managed stillness, the other kind. "What about it?" he said. She looked at the fire, the ring on her finger, warm and amber and deeply familiar, the faint sound of Liz sleeping in the room above them, which she had learned to hear through the walls in the specific way of someone who has organized every other sense around it. "About what it cost," she said quietly, "to stand in that corridor and hear what I heard, and then to come back anyway, not because I was asked to, because I decided to." She looked at him, and about how much that difference matters. He was very quiet. "It is the only thing that ever mattered," he said. "That it was your decision, Not the bond, not the terms, not the arrangement, you, choosing to come back, choosing to stay, choosing this. She looked at him with the expression she had not allowed herself to wear for the first 4 months in this house. Open and without management, and entirely her own. Then we both understand what this is, she said. Yes, he said, we do. He reached across the space between the chairs and turned the page of the book she had left open on the side table when she sat down. She had not yet started it. I have been thinking, he said, about the settlement families in the eastern outer territories. The resettlement provision, she said. There is a gap in the third codex volume. I identified it 4 months ago, she said. Nobody on the council looked at it. I am looking now, he said. Tell me what you found. So she told him. The fire burned. The pine forest held its quiet, enormous presence beyond the long window. Liz slept above them with the confident, even breathing of someone who has arrived in a life she considers entirely satisfactory. The pack house settled around all of it in the particular inhabited quiet of a place that had become, through difficulty and honesty, and the daily chosen decision to keep turning toward each other, finally and genuinely and completely, a home. Lyra turned a page. She did not stop talking for a very long time. And every word of it was real.